I never imagined my wedding day would begin with soft violin music floating through a historic Charleston estate, only to end with paramedics lifting me from the shattered quiet of my own bridal suite. When I close my eyes, I still see the way the golden evening light spilled across the antique mirrors, how the scent of white gardenias drifted through the open balcony doors, how everything looked perfect in that polished southern way my mother adored. I was supposed to be getting ready to walk down the aisle, but instead, I stood there in my lace gown, staring at my sister Harper as she shut the suite door behind her, with a click that settled into my spine like a warning. She smiled at me with that careful Charleston charm she had been praised for her entire life, but the smile never reached her eyes. She asked if we could talk about something important, something she said would affect the future of our family. I already knew what she meant. The trust. The monstrous $2 million wedding gift that was not a gift at all, but a set of chains disguised as generosity. I told her again that I would not sign it, that I wanted a marriage based on love and a life built on my own choices. The moment the words left my mouth, I watched the shift in her face. The sweetness dropped. The performance ended. Her voice snapped sharp as she told me that I was ruining everything, that our mother was humiliated, that I was embarrassing the Mercer name on my wedding day. She stepped closer, too close, her perfume clinging to the air between us like something choking. I backed away, but the suite was small and cluttered with wedding prep, and I had nowhere to go. She reached for my arm, not gently, but with a grip that surprised me. She said I owed the family my loyalty and that the trust was the only way to secure my place. When I pulled my arm free, she lost control. It happened fast. One moment she was yelling, and the next her hands pushed against me with a force I never expected from her. My back collided with the edge of the vintage vanity table. The sharp corner caught my side, sending a jolt of violent pain through my ribs. The glass jars on the table rattled, one rolled to the floor and cracked. I could not breathe for a moment. I remember staring at the carved wooden molding on the ceiling while a warmth spread beneath my palm where I clutched my side. Harper froze, her face pale, as if she only just realized what she had done. Then she panicked. I tried to sit up, but the pain made the room tilt. Harper stumbled backward, her heels scraping against the hardwood floor. Then she bolted for the door. I heard her pulling it open and screaming down the hallway that I had fallen, that I had slipped and hurt myself. Her voice echoed with false concern that would have fooled someone who did not grow up knowing every layer of her manipulation. I tried to reach the door. I remember dragging myself across the rug, the silk hem of my gown bunching under my knees, my hand pressing harder against my side. Every breath felt like a blade. I heard footsteps. A staff member's voice asked if everything was all right. Harper kept crying out that I had tripped. I wanted to shout to tell them what happened, but the pain stole the words from my throat. The footsteps grew louder, more frantic. I heard someone radio for security saying something sounded wrong inside the bridal suite. When the lock clicked and the door swung open, the world blurred. I saw the silhouettes of two security staff, the wedding coordinator behind them with her hands over her mouth. The horror in her eyes when she saw me on the floor. I heard someone say that the suite had no interior camera that they needed to clear the room, that this might be a crime scene. Then noise, people shouting instructions, someone calling emergency services, and above it all, my mother's voice slicing through the chaos. No press. Shut everything down. Do not let this get out. I floated in and out while the paramedics lifted me, their hands firm and quick as they checked my vitals and secured me onto the stretcher. The cold air from the hallway brushed my skin, and I remember wishing I could pull the light back into the room, back into the day that had been stolen from me. The last sound I heard before everything dimmed was my mother hissing at someone that nothing about this should reach the guests, that this family could not afford another scandal. Then, blackness. When I opened my eyes again, it was to the harsh white glow of the ICU lights reflecting off the metal railing beside my bed. The world was silent except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors, a slow mechanical heartbeat reminding me I was still alive. My wedding day was over. My innocence in anything involving my family was over. And as I stared at the ceiling tiles, the truth settled over me with a clarity I had never felt before. My revenge began here. I grew up in Charleston believing that the Mercer name meant safety, elegance, and dignity, because that was the story my mother repeated as often as she arranged flowers on the dining room table. She believed appearances were everything, and the Mercer legacy was something she guarded with the same precision she used when folding linen napkins into perfect swans for dinner parties. Our family was part of the old Southern money that Charleston locals talked about in hushed tones, the kind of wealth tied to vineyards, coastal properties, and country club connections passed down like heirlooms. From the outside, it looked idyllic, but on the inside, it felt like living inside a museum where every expression, every choice, and every emotion had to stay within a curated frame. My mother Evelyn was the curator. She came from a prestigious Charleston lineage and married my father when she was young, convinced their union was a power match made to preserve the family prestige she valued more than anything else. But their marriage began cracking long before I was born. My earliest memories are of muffled arguments behind closed doors, the sound of my mother's heels pacing the long hallway, my father's steady voice drowned under the sharp edge of hers. When I was 5, they finally divorced, and within a year, she married Clyde Mercer, a wealthy businessman known for his influence and ruthlessness. I remember the day she sat me down on a velvet bench in our sunroom and told me that Clyde would help our family rise again as if we had been sinking. She spoke of him like he was salvation, but even as a child, I sensed that she was more in love with his bank account than his presence. Harper came 2 years later. From the moment she arrived, the entire house shifted around her. My mother called her my little angel and future queen of Charleston. The staff cooed over her. Our neighbors brought monogrammed blankets and silver rattles engraved with her initials. There were pictures of her in every hallway, staged perfectly by my mother in smocked dresses and bows bigger than her face. She was the golden child before she could even walk. Meanwhile, I learned to make myself quiet. I was the child from my mother's first marriage, the one who carried my father's eyes and his quieter temperament. In my mother's mind, I was the crack in her perfect picture frame. She never said it directly, but I saw it in the way she corrected me for speaking too softly during dinner parties, or the way she scolded me for asking questions that made guests uncomfortable. She would give Harper a kiss for spilling juice on a rug, but glare at me for standing too close to an antique vase. When Harper started school, the favoritism became impossible to ignore. She received a brand new custom uniform every year while I wore hand-me-downs. Her art projects were displayed on the kitchen wall with magnets shaped like magnolias, while mine were tucked neatly into drawers to avoid clutter. My report cards filled with straight A's earned a quick nod. Harper's mediocre grades earned applause. Even then, I understood that the Mercer family operated on a strange currency. Beauty charm and compliance were priceless. Intelligence without obedience had no value. My mother raised Harper to shine at every social gathering. Harper learned to dance, to pour sweet tea gracefully, to greet people with just the right tilt of her chin. Meanwhile, I learned how to read the silence between adults and how to carry my emotions like fragile things that had to be kept hidden. Childhood became a lesson in emotional neglect. I started staying longer at school, volunteering for library hours, and lingering in the nurse's office, even when nothing was wrong. Being at home felt like walking through a storm with no sound. My father tried to maintain a presence in my life after the divorce, but my mother found ways to undermine him. She insisted that I spend holidays with her and Clyde because it is better for the family image. Over time, my visits with my father diminished until they became rare afternoons at quiet cafes where he asked if I was happy, and I lied to spare him. When I was 14, something shifted. I began to understand that while Harper was being molded into the perfect Charleston princess, I would need to find somewhere beyond our city where I could breathe. My interest in science and medicine sparked from watching my grandmother's hospice nurses care for her with gentleness my home rarely offered. I found purpose in that a direction. My mother called it a phase. Clyde called it impractical. Harper called it weird. I called it escape. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, my mother forced a polite smile for the guests, but later told me that I was drawing the wrong kind of attention. She wanted Harper to be the spotlight of the family, and said my ambitions threatened that. She encouraged me to pick a modest career, something appropriate for a Mercer daughter, something close to Charleston. When I told her I had been accepted into a competitive healthcare program in Raleigh, she stared at me for a long moment before saying I was selfish for wanting to leave. It was the first time I realized that my independence was not just unwelcome, but offensive to her carefully crafted world. Leaving Charleston for Raleigh felt like stepping into fresh air for the first time in my life. Raleigh was modern grounded and free from the heavy expectations that had followed me through my childhood. I worked 3 part-time jobs while studying full-time, but I felt light for the first time. No one knew my last name. No one cared about family legacies. I built friendships on laughter, not obligation. I found confidence in my classes and later in the hospital where I trained. Every skill I learned brought me closer to the life I wanted, one defined by purpose rather than performance. My mother called often at first, insisting I return home for social events where she paraded Harper like a debutante. I always said I was busy. Over time, the calls became infrequent. Harper occasionally sent messages pretending to check in, but always managed to insert comments about my mother's disappointment or questions about whether I planned to come back and support the family. I realized then how deeply control ran in our family. Clyde often tried a different approach. He talked to me as if I were an investment he wanted to manage. He would suggest jobs with companies he had influence over or hint at financial support if I would come back and work for the Mercer Enterprises. His offers were wrapped in politeness, but beneath them was pressure. Pressure to return, pressure to comply, pressure to accept my predetermined place. I refused every time. And every refusal created a larger crack in the facade of loyalty they expected from me. By the time I finished my CRNA certification and began working full-time, I no longer belonged to the Mercer world at all. I had built my own. Yet even then, despite the distance, the old patterns of emotional manipulation continued. Harper became my mother's shadow, the polished daughter who attended every charity gala and brunch. Their lives intertwined like a performance, and they resented my absence because it disrupted the image they wanted to project. Every holiday invitation felt like an obligation disguised as affection. Every phone call felt like a reminder of what they believed I owed them. The older I grew, the clearer it became. Harper had been raised to inherit the throne of Evelyn's world. I had been raised to stay quiet and grateful, and I had finally stopped playing that part. What I did not understand then was how deeply my refusal shaped the storm that would eventually hit my wedding day. My family had spent decades controlling every narrative about our lives. When I left Charleston and created my own, they lost their grip on me. When I met Noah and built a future without their influence, they panicked. And when I refused their $2 million trust, their final attempt to pull me back into their orbit, they saw it not as my decision, but as rebellion. Rebellion needed to be punished. Control needed to be restored. My wedding day was not the beginning of the conflict. It was the explosion of years of resentment, manipulation, and entitlement. And I was the only one in my family willing to break the pattern. I met Noah on a night when the hospital halls smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. The kind of night when exhaustion settles deep into your shoulders and every beep from a monitor feels sharper than the last. I was working a double shift in the trauma unit at UNC Health, my mind swimming in a fog of charting vitals and the hum of fluorescent lights. It was close to midnight when a young man stumbled into the hallway outside operating room 3, pale as a sheet and gripping his side. He kept insisting he was not hurt, that he was there for his coworker, that he just needed air, but his knees buckled and instinct took over before he hit the ground. I caught his arm and guided him against the wall. His breath came in uneven bursts. His pupils were slightly dilated. A stress reaction, I thought. Maybe shock. Maybe hypoglycemia. When he finally lifted his eyes to mine, something soft flickered there. Something disarming, even in the chaos. He apologized 3 times in a row, his voice a mixture of embarrassment and humor as he insisted he was fine. He just had not eaten in 12 hours. I brought him juice, forced him to sit, and monitored his vitals while we waited for his coworker to come out of surgery. He told me his name was Noah. He worked as an aerospace engineer, which explained his odd hours and the level of stress lining his face. He cracked a small joke about how planes were easier to understand than people. Even through my exhaustion, I laughed. There was something grounding about him, a steadiness that did not feel forced. When his coworker finally stabilized, he thanked me again, lingering longer than necessary before leaving. I thought that would be the end of it. 2 weeks later, he showed up at the hospital front desk holding a paper bag filled with pastries and asked for me by name. The receptionist raised an eyebrow and sent him upstairs. He waited until my break and offered the pastries as a thank you. He said he wanted to take me out sometime if I ever had a night that did not involve saving half of North Carolina. I said yes before I realized I was speaking. Our first date was simple: a quiet cafe near the university, warm lights glowing over worn brick walls. We talked for 3 hours without noticing the time slip past us. He was curious, intelligent, and funny in a way that never felt like performance. He listened not just with his ears, but with his entire presence. No one had ever made me feel that before. As the months passed, we fell into a rhythm that felt like breathing. We cooked together on Sundays. We went hiking in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We watched documentaries he found fascinating and romantic comedies I pretended not to like. He told me about his childhood in Asheville, about his mother who raised him alone, about how he worked his way through college. I told him bits of my upbringing, though I softened the harsh edges of it at first. I did not want to explain that my childhood had been shaped by money, silence, and expectations I could never meet. He sensed there were shadows in my past, but he never pressed. He simply made space. And in that space, I found myself letting him in. The first time he met my family was at a Thanksgiving dinner in Charleston. The memory still stings. The house was decorated with gold candlesticks, crystal glasses, and an entire roasted turkey in the center of the table, but the air felt colder than any November wind. My mother greeted Noah with a forced smile and an up-and-down glance that measured his suit, his shoes, and possibly his worth. Clyde shook his hand with the same stiff politeness he used when greeting someone he planned to dismiss later. Harper barely looked up from her phone before offering a lukewarm hello. Throughout dinner, my mother made pointed comments about Charleston society and expectations for daughters of prominent families. Harper chimed in with little jabs disguised as jokes, asking Noah if he understood what it meant to marry into a family with tradition. Noah stayed gracious even when my cheeks burned with embarrassment. He handled every backhanded remark with a calm strength that unsettled my mother. She was used to people bending to her tone. Noah did not bend. When he excused himself to help clear the table, Harper leaned toward me and whispered that he seemed nice but ordinary. She said it the way some people describe a cheap handbag. I did not respond, but something inside me tightened. After dinner, when we finally drove away from the Mercer estate, Noah reached across the console and held my hand. He did not say anything for a long time, but eventually he asked if family dinners always felt like walking through a minefield. I wanted to tell him no, that it had been an unusually tense night, but honesty slipped out instead. Yes, I said, they often did. He squeezed my hand gently and told me he would walk through any minefield as long as it meant walking beside me. I knew in that moment I could build a life with him. A few months later, he proposed. It happened on a quiet overlook in Asheville, surrounded by soft evening light and towering trees. His voice trembled a little as he asked, and mine trembled when I said yes. For a few weeks, everything felt perfect. Then came the wedding planning. The moment my mother learned Noah and I were engaged, she acted as though she had been assigned the role of director for a Broadway production. She insisted the wedding be held in Charleston, claimed it was the only proper place for a Mercer daughter to marry, and began creating lists of people who needed to be invited for social reasons. When I pushed back, she cornered me with guilt laced in velvet. She talked about family reputation and Southern tradition, about obligations and appearances, about how a wedding reflects the values of a family. I knew she did not mean my values. She meant hers. Noah suggested we elope. I almost said yes, but something in me wanted to reclaim the narrative my mother had controlled since my childhood. I wanted to have my wedding and not allow her to shape it into something hollow, so we compromised. We would marry in Charleston, but the decisions would be ours. My mother pretended to accept this with grace. Harper did not pretend at all. She made every meeting with planners more difficult, finding flaws in everything, making comments about how I did not understand Charleston etiquette and insisting that I needed her expertise. It became clear she was jealous, though she masked it with Southern politeness. She claimed she was helping, but every suggestion came with an undercurrent of control. As the wedding day approached, tension grew thicker. My mother scrutinized every choice from the floral arrangements to the menu. Harper kept inserting herself into decisions that had nothing to do with her. Clyde tried to persuade Noah to sign documents tying him financially to the Mercer Enterprises. And beneath it all, there was a simmering resentment in my family, a belief that I had betrayed them by choosing a life outside their orbit. I felt the pressure rising in ways I could not yet name. Small comments became daggers. Moments of silence became loaded. Noah noticed it each time we visited Charleston. He told me my mother seemed determined to turn our wedding into a stage for her own image. He warned me that Harper's smiles hid something darker, something competitive and wounded. I tried to brush away his worries because I had learned long ago to normalize how my family behaved, but he saw through the cracks I had ignored. As the final weeks closed in, a quiet dread settled inside me. Something about the way my mother watched me, the way Harper clung to the wedding plans, felt off. Not dramatic, not obvious, just wrong. I told myself it was stress. I told myself every bride felt this way. But deep down, a small voice whispered that my family did not simply attend my life. They interfered with it. They shaped it. They twisted it. And on my wedding day, they intended to reclaim it. I was too hopeful to listen to that voice, too desperate to believe that this time things would be different. I had no idea that the storm was already forming and that the Mercer family I thought I understood was preparing to show me just how far they would go to maintain control. The $2 million gift arrived the way every major decision in the Mercer family arrived, wrapped in elegance and poison at the same time. It happened 3 months before the wedding during what my mother called a simple family dinner, though nothing in that house was ever simple. The dining room glowed with candlelight silverware polished enough to reflect my own nervous expression back at me. Harper sat across from me in a pastel dress that made her look like she had stepped out of one of my mother's curated portrait sessions. Clyde occupied the head of the table, swirling bourbon in a crystal glass while pretending to appear thoughtful. My mother entered last, as always, letting the room settle around her presence. When the plates were cleared and dessert was served, she folded her hands and looked at me with the serene expression she reserved for conversations she had rehearsed. She said the family had been discussing my future, a phrase that always meant decisions had been made without me. She explained that the Mercers wanted to offer Noah and me a wedding gift, something generous, something symbolic of unity. Harper leaned forward with a smile too bright for the moment, and Clyde reached under the table to produce a leather-bound folder. He placed it in front of me as if it were an engagement ring. Inside, he said, was the documentation for an irrevocable family trust worth $2 million. The word irrevocable hit me like a cold gust. He said the trust was designed to help Noah and me begin our married life with financial security. It sounded noble until he began listing the stipulations. The first requirement was that I move back to Charleston permanently after the wedding. The second was that Harper be granted co-managing authority over the trust to ensure proper stewardship of family assets. The third was that I commit to taking a position within Mercer Enterprises once my mother could no longer oversee certain operations. It took everything in me not to laugh. It was not a gift, it was a contract, a cage with velvet lining. Noah reached for my hand under the table, his thumb brushing gently across my palm. My mother continued speaking about legacy and responsibility as though reading from a script. She said the trust would reestablish my standing within Charleston society, that it would show I valued family loyalty. Clyde called it an honor. Harper called it a blessing. I called it an ultimatum. When I asked why Harper needed to manage the trust with me, she said it was simply a matter of tradition. Harper added that I had been away too long and might not fully understand the financial complexities of Charleston philanthropy. The implication was clear. They trusted her more than they trusted me. Noah cleared his throat and asked a few pointed questions about the binding nature of the document. Clyde's expression tightened. He said it was normal for wealthy families to protect their assets. He said the terms were not open for negotiation. He said the sooner I signed, the better. My mother insisted the trust needed to be finalized before the wedding because she wanted everything settled and harmonious. Her definition of harmonious had always meant compliant. Harper's smile widened when I hesitated. She told me that this was my chance to finally be part of something meaningful, that not many people were given such opportunities. Her tone dripped with superiority, the way it always did when she believed she held the upper hand. She wanted to be the gatekeeper of my future. She wanted power over me, even in my marriage. I closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. My mother stiffened. Clyde narrowed his eyes. Harper tilted her head, pretending to be confused. I said I was grateful for the thought, but I would not be signing the trust. Silence hit the table like a weight. My mother's smile cracked around the edges. Clyde's jaw tightened. Harper blinked rapidly, her face flushing. I explained that my life was in Raleigh, my work was fulfilling, and I had no intention of moving back to Charleston. I said I did not need my sister managing my finances. I said I wanted my marriage to be built on genuine choices, not obligations wrapped in money. My mother leaned back slowly, clasping her hands as though steadying herself. She said I was being impulsive, that my independence had clouded my judgment. Clyde muttered something about how I did not understand the responsibilities of wealth. Harper whispered that I had always been ungrateful. I felt Noah squeeze my hand again, grounding me. He told them gently but firmly that our plans were our own and that financial entanglements like this would not serve us well. My mother's eyes sharpened. She looked at him as though he had stepped out of place in her script. She said he was influencing me for the worse. She said love was one thing, but understanding the world of old Southern families was another. Noah remained calm, but I felt anger simmer beneath his steady exterior. He told her that I was capable of making my own decisions, that the life I had built was not accidental but intentional. That infuriated her more than anything. She stood smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her blouse and said that if I would not sign the trust, the family could no longer support the wedding financially. It was a threat, though she delivered it with elegance. I told her they did not need to support anything. Clyde stood and declared that I was making a mistake, that I was throwing away security. Harper chimed in again, accusing me of sabotaging the family. Her voice rose with each word until she sounded less like a polished Charleston belle and more like a cornered child. For the first time in my life, I did not retreat. I did not apologize. I did not bend. I told them no, not politely, not quietly. Just no. The air changed. Harper stood so suddenly her chair scraped across the hardwood floor. She said I was not the only daughter in the family and that maybe the wrong one was getting married first. I had never seen her so openly vindictive. My mother ended the evening abruptly and left the room without saying goodbye. Clyde shot Noah a look of disdain before following her. Harper lingered only long enough to whisper that I would regret choosing love over legacy. When the door closed behind them, I felt an eerie stillness. Noah and I walked out of that house holding hands, but even in the cool Charleston night, I felt a fire building inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter, something warning me that this was not over. Over the next days, my mother called repeatedly, softening her tone, pretending to seek compromise. She said I could move to Charleston part-time. She said Harper's involvement was symbolic. She said Clyde's leadership would eventually benefit me. When persuasion failed, guilt followed. She reminded me of everything she had provided, every sacrifice she claimed she had made. When guilt failed, pressure returned. Clyde suggested revisiting the trust after the rehearsal dinner. Harper began insisting we meet to clear the air. I declined. And with every refusal, their patience thinned. The trust became the unspoken center of every interaction. It was not about money. It was about control. They wanted me back in Charleston under their watchful eyes. They wanted to shape my future with the same determination they used to shape my childhood. They wanted their version of a family, and they could not accept that I wanted my own. The $2 million was never a gift. It was a leash, and when I broke it, they decided to break me. I did not yet understand how far they would go. Not until my wedding day. Not until the moment my sister slammed me into that vanity table and sent me crashing into the beginning of the nightmare they had crafted. But the first crack in their plan happened that night at dinner with one small word that changed everything. No. The morning of my wedding began with soft light slipping through the lace curtains of the bridal suite and settling across the room like a blessing, but the peace felt artificial, as if the house itself knew something was wrong. I woke before my alarm, my chest tight with a kind of instinctive unease I could not explain. The historic Charleston estate was quiet, too quiet for a day meant to celebrate love, family, and new beginnings. The air held a heaviness, a pressure that made each breath feel cautious. I tried to brush it off as nerves telling myself every bride woke up with a knot in her stomach, but deep down I knew the feeling was familiar. It was the same sensation I carried during my childhood in the Mercer home whenever my mother was preparing to confront me about something I had not yet discovered I had done wrong. As I sat at the vanity while the stylist curled my hair, I noticed Harper slipping in and out of the suite more often than necessary. She moved with a restless energy, her heels tapping too sharply on the hardwood, her eyes darting between me and the door. At one point, she whispered to a staff member in a hurried tone, and when the stylist leaned down to adjust the angle of the curling iron, Harper turned to me with a smile that felt rehearsed. She said she had arranged a special moment for us later, something meaningful, something just for sisters. I knew her too well. Anything that required secrecy from Harper meant trouble. Minutes later, the wedding planner approached me privately and asked if I had approved changes to the bridal suite setup. She explained that someone had rearranged several items earlier that morning and that Harper had insisted she was acting under my instructions. I had said no such thing. When the planner mentioned Harper's name, her voice dropped lower, as though she hoped I would understand the weight behind her concern without her needing to state it outright. She said the staff had noticed Harper being unusually assertive, even controlling about the flow of people entering and leaving the suite. She kept insisting on privacy blocking last-minute checks and demanding that certain doors remain locked until she said otherwise. The stylist had barely finished pinning the last strand of my hair when my mother walked in wearing an expression that suggested she had been awake for hours orchestrating things behind the scenes. Her eyes swept over my dress, my hair, my makeup, as though she were inspecting a display at one of her charity galas. She made a comment about how the lighting in the suite made my complexion look uneven. Then she smoothed my veil and said she hoped I was prepared to behave gracefully today, especially considering everything our family had been through. Her words carried an invisible accusation. When my phone vibrated with a message from Noah telling me he loved me and that he could not wait to see me at the altar, a thick warmth filled my chest, but even that comfort could not drown out the unease pressing in at the edges. Throughout the morning, I kept catching glimpses of my mother disappearing down corridors at odd intervals. She would step into rooms quickly and close the door, and each time she reemerged, her expression seemed sharper. Clyde hovered around the downstairs area, with his phone glued to his ear, giving orders in clipped tones, pausing whenever he saw me as if calculating whether he should speak. Harper, meanwhile, drifted between sweetness and irritation, snapping at staff one moment and acting overly affectionate with me the next. It felt like watching actors forget their lines and scramble to recover before the audience noticed. There was a moment when I looked out the window and saw Harper talking to one of the security staff on the lawn. Her hands moved in a series of animated gestures, and the guard looked confused but nodded along. The image sent a chill across my skin. As time drew closer to the ceremony, the red flags only multiplied. The coordinator asked if I had requested that my suite door be locked until Harper returned from another errand. I had not. Another staff member mentioned that Harper had removed a small camera that had been installed temporarily during setup days earlier. She claimed it obstructed the lighting. That made no sense. It was not even in her way. My stomach tightened further when I overheard my mother whispering to someone near the stairwell. Her voice was low but tense. She said something about managing the narrative and making sure nothing disrupted the ceremony. The word narrative lodged in my chest like a warning. I began to notice other small oddities. Harper kept checking her phone in frantic bursts, walking out of rooms to reply to messages returning with a slightly flushed face. Clyde bumped into one of the waitstaff near the kitchen and snapped at him with an irritation too heavy for a small mistake. The atmosphere felt charged in a way I could not place, as if an entire plan was simmering beneath the surface. Noah called the suite 30 minutes before the ceremony and told me he loved me again, but I could hear tension in his voice. He said my mother had been abrupt with him earlier, reminding him of seating protocols and insisting he cooperate with certain changes to the program. He said he did not want to bother me with the details, but that something about the tone made him uneasy. I told myself none of it mattered. I would walk down the aisle, say my vows, and leave this house behind me. But just as that hopeful thought settled in my mind, Harper appeared again, her smile too bright, her voice too sweet. She said she needed a private moment with me before the ceremony. Only 30 minutes, she insisted. She wanted to talk woman to woman, sister to sister. The stylist and planner exchanged looks I was not supposed to notice. The planner gently asked Harper if she could wait until after the ceremony. Harper's expression changed instantly, her sweetness cracking around the edges. She insisted the moment was important. She insisted I needed to hear her out. She insisted she had my best interests at heart. Every fiber in my body told me to say no, but Harper had always known how to manipulate the thin threads of obligation I carried from childhood. She said she needed me. She said she wanted to repair things. She said she wanted us to start fresh before I became a wife. The room fell silent. The planner lingered at the doorway as though waiting for me to choose safety over sentiment. My mother returned at that exact moment, as if cued, and said firmly that I should give Harper her moment. Her tone left no room for disagreement. I felt that familiar childhood squeeze in my chest, the old pressure to play the role they expected. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Harper beamed in triumph, though she tried to hide it. The planner's face tightened with concern. She told me she and security would stay close. She told me to call out if I needed anything. Her voice was careful, but her eyes said something louder. She sensed danger. I sensed it too. Every instinct was screaming that something was wrong, something more than nerves, something more than pre-wedding tension, something purposeful. As Harper closed the suite door behind us and turned the lock with a practiced flick of her wrist, the air shifted. I felt the unease solidify into fear, not because she had done anything yet, but because I finally recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same look she wore as a child when she wanted something she believed she deserved, a look that said she would not be denied. The red flags had been there all morning. I had ignored them out of hope, out of habit, out of the desperate wish that my family could be different for one day. Instead, they were worse. And the moment the lock clicked into place, I knew I had just walked into something I might not walk out of unchanged. The moment Harper turned the lock on the bridal suite door, something in her expression shifted from tense determination to a brittle kind of triumph, the kind she used to wear as a child when she had cornered me into a game I never agreed to play. The room felt smaller, air pressed thin against my chest, and for a second, I wondered if anyone downstairs sensed the danger humming behind this door. Harper moved with slow, deliberate steps, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor like a metronome, marking the countdown to something inevitable. She smoothed her dress in a gesture that looked practiced, almost ceremonial, before turning toward me with a smile that did not belong on the face of a sister on her sibling's wedding day. I asked her what she wanted to talk about, and she said the word trust with an emphasis that made my stomach tighten. She launched into it quickly like she had rehearsed the speech. She said she was trying to protect the family. She said the $2 million trust was meant to restore harmony. She said my refusal had embarrassed everyone, especially our mother, and that today was not the day to make things worse. I told her I was done discussing the trust, that the matter was closed. Her eyes hardened. She said I had a responsibility to honor the Mercer legacy, that walking into marriage without accepting the gift was disrespectful. I stood near the window light filtering through the lace curtains and brushing against my gown. I tried to keep my voice steady. I said again that I would not sign anything. Her breathing quickened. She stepped closer. Her voice rose in octave frustration bleeding through her polished tone. She accused me of being selfish, of abandoning the family, of choosing a man over blood. When I tried to step back, she followed, closing the space between us with the sharp determination of someone who had convinced herself she was fighting a noble cause. I told her to stop, that we could talk later, that the wedding was minutes away. She reached for my arm, her fingers closing too tightly around my skin. For a moment we stood there, two grown women dressed for opposite kinds of futures. Then she said something that chilled me. She said I was not thinking clearly, that I needed guidance, that she was only doing what was necessary to make sure I did not ruin everything. I tried pulling my arm away. She tightened her grip. And then it happened so fast I did not understand the motion until I felt the impact. She shoved me, hard. The force sent me stumbling backward. My heel snagged on the edge of the rug, and the world tilted before the sharp corner of the vintage vanity slammed into my side. Pain exploded through my ribs. A sharp, hot, tearing sensation radiated across my skin as if the bone itself had erupted. A glass perfume bottle toppled and shattered beside me, but the actual injury came from the carved wooden edge of the table slicing into my side with brutal clarity. The room blurred. I gasped, clutching my ribs, but the pain stole the breath before it could form. Harper froze. Her face went white, her hands trembling. She whispered my name once, twice, then pressed her fingers to her mouth as though shocked by what she was capable of. She backed away, steps uneven, panic climbing her expression. I reached out toward her not to grab her, but to steady myself to anchor the spinning world. She jerked back as though I had accused her. Then her panic morphed into calculation, something tight and frantic behind her eyes. She turned toward the door, yanked it open, and screamed into the hallway that I had fallen, that I had slipped, that I was hurt. Her voice echoed down the corridor, frantic and theatrical. I tried to push myself up, but pain stabbed through my ribs with such intensity that my vision blurred around the edges. I could taste metal in my mouth. I pressed my hand to my side and felt warmth pooling beneath my palm, but I could not tell how bad the injury was. I tried to crawl toward the door, but my gown tangled around my knees and my arms shook too violently to hold my weight. Harper kept screaming, calling for help, insisting it had been an accident. Footsteps rushed from the corridor. 2 staff members appeared first, their eyes widening when they saw me on the floor. One of them radioed for security, his voice tight. The other knelt beside me asking if I could speak. I tried to tell him what had happened, but the words lodged in my throat. Pain made each breath shallow, thin, desperate. A second later, 2 security guards arrived, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm. One asked Harper what happened. She stammered through her story, claiming she had stepped out of the room for a moment and returned to find me on the floor. Her hands shook convincingly, too convincingly. The guards exchanged a look. One of them asked why the door had been locked. Harper claimed I wanted privacy. She said I had insisted on a moment alone. Her lies were too quick, too tidy. The wedding coordinator arrived next, her eyes sweeping across the scene. Something flickered in her expression. Suspicion. She looked at Harper and then at me on the floor. She knelt beside me and asked if I could move my legs. I nodded faintly. She checked my pulse, her calm voice grounding me for a moment. Then a noise caught everyone's attention. A faint, muffled audio echo coming from the hallway security camera. It had recorded raised voices earlier. One of the staff whispered that they heard shouting before the crash. Harper's face drained of color. The coordinator's expression sharpened with concern. She stood and told security to call for medical assistance immediately and to keep the hallway clear. Someone said the words, domestic incident. Someone else said they needed to treat the suite as a potential crime scene. As the room spun, I caught a glimpse of my mother moving swiftly toward us. She pushed past the planner and knelt beside Harper first, not me. She grabbed Harper's arms and whispered sharply into her ear. Harper shook her head, panicked, repeating that it had been an accident. My mother snapped at her to stop talking, to let the professionals handle it. When my mother finally turned toward me, I expected anger, or fear, or concern. But she looked at me with cold calculation, as if assessing damage done to something she owned. She told the coordinator to control the situation immediately to make sure no photographs were taken to keep the guests unaware. A paramedic team arrived. They placed a cervical collar around my neck, even though my injury was lower following protocol. They lifted me gently onto a backboard. The shift in pressure sent a searing wave up my side. I clenched my jaw to keep from crying out. As they strapped me in, I heard the coordinator telling one of the guards to check the hallway audio again and record everything. My mother snapped at her, insisting this was a private family matter. The coordinator ignored her. Harper stood by the door, arms wrapped around herself, the mask of innocence cracking. Tears welled in her eyes. Not remorse, fear. Fear of exposure. As the paramedics wheeled me through the hallway, I heard the wedding coordinator murmur to someone that until they had clarity, they needed to treat this as an active incident. And when the stretcher reached the entrance of the estate, I heard my mother's voice hiss behind me. "No press. Shut everything down. Do not let this get out." The last thing I saw before the ambulance doors closed was Harper standing frozen in the doorway, her face pale, her hands trembling, and her eyes darting between me and our mother, as if waiting for instructions on how to rewrite what had just happened. In that moment, I realized the truth. Harper had not just panicked, she had acted, and now she needed the world to believe the lie. The first thing I became aware of was the sound of a monitor beeping in calm, steady intervals, a rhythm so precise it felt almost foreign after the chaos that had swallowed the last hours of my wedding day. My eyelids were heavy glued together by exhaustion and medication, and when I finally forced them open, the harsh white light of the ICU ceiling spilled into my vision. For a moment, I could not remember where I was. Then a sharp tug in my side reminded me. Pain radiated from my ribs in a dull, insistent throb that wrapped around my torso like a warning. I tried to shift but froze when the movement sent a piercing heat through my body. My breath caught shallow and trembling. I blinked until the room came into focus. Machines surrounded my bed like silent guardians. Clear bags of fluids hung from metal poles. A soft oxygen line brushed my upper lip, and the faint antiseptic scent of the intensive care unit washed over me in a wave of familiarity mixed with dread. As a CRNA, I had stood in countless ICU rooms. I had cared for patients in this exact environment, coaching them through fear, confusion, and pain. Now I was the one lying still beneath scratchy hospital sheets, my body weak, my future uncertain. A soft voice broke through the fog. "You are safe now." I turned my head slightly and saw Nurse Lena standing beside my bed, her dark hair pulled into a neat bun and her badge reflecting the overhead lights. Her presence felt grounding, her tone gentle in a way that made my throat burn with unexpected emotion. She explained that I had suffered a deep laceration along my ribs, significant bruising, and a temporary drop in blood pressure from trauma and shock. She said the paramedics had stabilized me quickly, that the emergency team acted fast, and that the wound had been cleaned and sutured. She spoke clearly, calmly, the way medical professionals do when they know their patient is scared, but still needs the truth. My mind struggled to catch up. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. I managed a whisper. "My wedding." Lena nodded, her expression softening. "Yes." She said I had been brought in from the Charleston estate and that hospital protocol required gathering certain details. She asked if I remembered what happened. The question hit harder than the pain. My memory flickered. Harper's grip on my arm, her voice rising, the shove, the crash against the vanity, the pain stealing my breath. The lies screamed into the hallway. I nodded faintly. But before I could say more, the door to my room opened and my mother stepped inside with the grace of a woman entering a gala rather than an ICU. Her heels clicked on the linoleum floor, her posture perfect, her expression composed in that familiar, controlled way. Behind her walked a man in a tailored suit, one I recognized as her attorney friend who made appearances at various Mercer events. Lena stiffened. She glanced at me, then at my mother, and politely excused herself to check on another patient. My mother waited until the door closed fully before approaching my bed. She did not touch me. She did not ask if I was all right. She simply looked down at me with the same calculated distance she had used my entire life. She said the word accident quietly, as if testing how it sounded in the air. She told me the story Harper had given the staff. She said Harper had found me on the floor, that I must have slipped, that the stress had likely gotten to me. Her voice dripped with disappointment masked as concern. I tried to speak, tried to tell her what really happened, but she lifted her hand to silence me. "Not here," she said. "Not yet. This hospital is full of ears." My skin prickled. She leaned closer and whispered that the family had already done damage control, that the guests had been told about a minor fall, that the ceremony was postponed for now. She said we needed to keep things quiet. We, as if I were part of her plan. Before I could muster the strength to respond, she told me Noah had been kept in the waiting room because the situation needed to be handled carefully. She insisted I should rest and allow the family to speak for me until I regained my strength. Something inside me snapped. The quiet part of me, the obedient part. I said no. My voice was raw but firm. I told her she would not speak for me. I told her Harper pushed me. I told her this was not an accident. For the first time since she entered the room, her expression faltered, only for a second. Then she straightened as if my words were a mild inconvenience rather than the truth. She said I was confused. She said trauma clouds judgment. She said I needed to remember the importance of family unity. Then she turned sharply and walked out of the room without waiting for my reply. The moment the door closed, the strength that had flared in me faded into exhaustion. I lay there, staring at the ceiling tiles, feeling the pulse of pain echo through my ribs. The betrayal burned hotter than the wound itself. A soft knock came a few minutes later. The door opened again, but this time it was Noah. His eyes were red around the edges, worry carved into every line of his face. The moment he saw me, he exhaled a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his chest for hours. He hurried to my side, his hand finding mine with the gentleness of a man terrified he might hurt me. He asked what happened, voice shaking. When I whispered Harper's name, anger surged through him, a controlled fury I had never seen before. He told me that my mother had tried to bar him from entering, that she had told the nurses only immediate family could visit, but Lena had stepped in and reminded her that only the patient decides who can visit in an ICU. God bless nursing staff. He told me that my mother and Harper had spent the past hour trying to create a narrative that I had fallen due to stress. He said staff were uneasy because they heard raised voices on the hallway audio before the crash. He said security was reviewing everything. And in that moment, something in me shifted. I realized that my family was no longer simply toxic or controlling. They were dangerous. I told Noah everything, every detail, every word, every shove. He listened, his jaw clenched, his eyes dark with fury and heartbreak. By the time I finished, he pressed his forehead gently against mine and whispered a promise. He said we would not let them rewrite this. He said we would not let them bury the truth. His hand slid into mine, steady and warm, and something inside me began to anchor itself. Not in rage, not in fear, in resolve. Lena returned to check my vitals. She asked softly if I felt safe with the visitors allowed in my room. I said I did with Noah. She nodded, understanding more than I said. She told me the police would likely want a statement when I was stronger. She said I should rest, but her eyes conveyed something else, a quiet encouragement, a recognition of injustice, a spark of solidarity between women who have seen too much to ignore the truth. That night, as the hospital quieted and the monitors hummed in steady unison, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. Fear pulsed through me. Pain pulsed through me. But beneath both was something sharper. I thought about all the years of manipulation, all the years of being dismissed, shaped, silenced. I thought about the trust, the lies, the shove, the way my mother prioritized Harper over my safety. And I realized something that changed everything. My family had drawn first blood. They had turned my wedding into a crime scene because I refused to surrender my life. They thought I would hide. They thought I would bend. They thought I would protect the family name at the expense of myself. They were wrong. As the monitor continued its steady rhythm beside me, I whispered a promise into the quiet room. I will expose them. All of them. And the ICU, the place where I had helped strangers reclaim their lives, would become the place where I reclaimed mine. The morning after the attack began with the familiar buzz of hospital activity echoing down the ICU hallway. But inside my room, everything felt unnervingly still, as though the walls were holding their breath with me. The pain in my ribs had settled into a deep, throbbing ache that pulsed with every movement, but my mind was sharper than it had been the night before. Clarity returned like a slow tide, and with it came the rising certainty that if I did nothing, my family's version of the story would cement itself into the truth. I refused to let that happen. When Lena came in to check my vitals, she lowered her voice and told me 2 police officers were waiting to speak with me once my attending physician approved it. She also said security from the estate had provided initial statements and the hospital had logged the incident as a possible assault based on the nature of my injuries. That word lingered in the air, heavy and validating at the same time. Assault. It was no longer just my word against my family's. There was medical and physical evidence supporting what I knew had happened. When the officers entered, they spoke with the calm professionalism I had seen so many times during my clinical rotations. They introduced themselves and explained that they needed to gather details while the timeline was still fresh. They asked me to recount everything from the moment Harper entered the suite. I told them everything. The tension her demands, the argument, the shove, the impact, the pain, the lies she screamed into the hallway. I described the layout of the suite and the way Harper locked the door. I told them the exact tone in her voice when she said she was doing what was necessary to protect the family. The officers took meticulous notes. When I finished, one of them asked a question that tightened my chest. Had Harper ever shown aggressive tendencies toward me in the past? I hesitated, not because I lacked examples, but because I realized how many years of subtle cruelty I had normalized. I told them about the verbal jabs, the manipulation, the ways she had cornered me emotionally throughout our childhood and adolescence. I explained that she had never put her hands on me before, but she had always pushed boundaries, always tried to control whatever she could. The officer nodded with the steady patience of someone who had heard similar stories from victims whose families insisted their abuse was simply discipline or concern. When they left, I felt simultaneously exposed and relieved. The next visitor was the wedding coordinator from the estate, a woman named Mara, whose voice always carried the calm authority required to navigate unpredictable brides, impatient families, and complex events. But this time, her usual composure flickered with concern. She approached my bed cautiously, apologizing if her visit was inappropriate, but she said she felt obligated to tell me what she witnessed. She said she had heard raised voices through the hallway camera feed earlier that day while checking on last-minute logistics. She heard Harper shouting something she could not fully make out, but described as aggressive. She also said several staff members reported hearing a loud impact before Harper opened the door and began screaming. She explained that the estate's hallway cameras did not record video inside the suite, but they recorded audio from the corridor. The microphone had picked up shouting and the sound of furniture hitting something. My heart pounded. For the first time, I realized the hallway audio might have captured the most important evidence of all. When Mara left, Noah arrived. His presence felt like an anchor in the storm. He held my hand, sitting on the edge of the chair, as though afraid even the slightest shift would cause me pain. He said something had happened at the estate after the ambulance left. Staff members had grown increasingly uneasy when Harper kept repeating her story, and one of the security guards insisted on reviewing the hallway audio. He told me that my mother and Harper protested, claiming it was a breach of privacy, but the estate owner intervened and allowed the review. According to the guard, there were distinct sounds of Harper shouting at me before a heavy crash. Noah said the exact phrase heard before the impact was something like, "You are ruining everything," or "sign it," depending on who recalled it. The police now had that recording. That detail hit me like a surge of oxygen. For the first time in years, I felt my voice had weight. My truth had proof. Later, another officer returned to the ICU with a small recorder. He said they wanted to read my rights before continuing, not because I was in any trouble, but because they wanted my formal recorded statement to be admissible and protected. I recounted everything again steady this time. My voice no longer shook. They asked follow-up questions. Where exactly did Harper stand? How far was I from the vanity? Did she make physical contact before the shove? When I finished, the officer told me that the severity and location of my injury was consistent with being pushed into a fixed structure rather than a simple fall. He said the medical report supported my account. After they left, I lay back staring at the ceiling. My ribs ached, but beneath that pain was something colder, a rising clarity. My family had underestimated me for years. They thought I would fold under pressure. They thought I would protect them even while bleeding. They were wrong. Over the next 2 days, pieces of evidence began to surface like stones rising from murky water. First was the hallway audio, then came staff testimonies. One of the hairstylists admitted she heard Harper speaking in a sharp, panicked voice before the crash. Another staff member said he had seen Harper speaking intensely with one of the security guards earlier that morning, insisting the bridal suite needed to remain undisturbed for a private family moment. Then, the wedding planner contacted police and provided text messages Harper had sent her at dawn. The messages were frantic. They said things like, "Make sure no one comes in unless I say so, and I need 30 minutes alone with her before the ceremony." Another staff member disclosed that Harper had asked her whether the hallway cameras had been working all week. That alone raised red flags. But the most damning piece came later. Noah had gone back to the estate to collect a few items that had belonged to me. While he was there, a young intern working the event handed him a printed email thread she had been asked to store. She told him she felt uncomfortable with its contents. The emails were between my mother and Clyde. In them, my mother complained that I had rejected the trust and insisted something had to be done before the ceremony. One line chilled me. She wrote, "We cannot afford to let her ruin this." Another email from Clyde read, "Apply pressure. She will fold." What pressure meant suddenly snapped into horrifying clarity. Noah handed the printed copies to the police. They took them seriously. Combined with the audio recording and the staff testimonies, the email thread revealed a pattern. My family had orchestrated a plan. Harper was the one who executed it. And they all expected I would break quietly. That afternoon, my attending physician cleared me to leave the ICU and transfer to a private recovery room. Pain followed me like a shadow, but determination held stronger. When I arrived in the new room, Lena helped me settle into the bed. She made sure the door remained partially open and stayed nearby longer than necessary, as if she sensed the weight of what was happening. She told me the hospital had flagged my case for social work and a legal follow-up. She reminded me I had the right to restrict certain family members from visiting. I told her I wanted a list. When she handed it to me, I crossed out 3 names without hesitation. My mother, Harper, Clyde. Noah stayed with me through the afternoon, holding my hand, telling me repeatedly that I was not alone. For years, I had been fighting a quiet war inside myself to escape my family's grip. Now that war was out in the open, documented and undeniable. Evidence was piling up like bricks in a wall I would use to defend myself, a wall I would use to expose the truth, a wall that would end everything my family tried to control. Before I drifted to sleep that night, staring at the soft glow of the hallway lights reflecting off the floor, I made another promise. I would not let fear soften me again. I would not let guilt silence me. I would build this wall of evidence piece by piece, no matter how painful. And when it was high enough, strong enough, undeniable enough, I would bring it down on every person who thought I was easy to break. The day I was discharged from the hospital marked the beginning of a new kind of pain, one that settled not in my ribs, but in the space between fear and determination. Leaving the controlled environment of the ICU felt like stepping into a storm without shelter, but Noah's hand on my back steadied me. He helped me into the passenger seat and drove slowly toward Raleigh, the tension in the car thick with all the words we had not yet spoken. We both knew that once we crossed the threshold of our apartment, we would be stepping into the first true battle of our lives. My family had money influence and decades of practice controlling narratives. But now I had the truth. I had evidence. And for the first time, I had a partner willing to fight beside me. When we arrived home, I could hear the faint hum of my phone vibrating endlessly inside. Noah retrieved it and handed it to me reluctantly. The screen lit up with dozens of missed calls and messages, some from extended family, many from Charleston Society members I barely knew, too many from my mother. I did not open any of them. Instead, I placed the phone face down on the table. I told Noah I needed a lawyer, a real one, not someone connected to Charleston, not someone who could be manipulated. He already had a name, Maya Townsend, a civil litigation attorney known for handling complex cases involving wealthy families, medical disputes, and domestic incidents. She was sharp, unshakable, and most importantly, uninterested in who my mother was. 2 days later, I sat across from Maya in her office. She listened patiently as I recounted every detail from the dinner that introduced the trust to the moment my sister's hands shoved me across the bridal suite. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and folded her arms. Her eyes held the kind of calm that comes only from years of seeing people lie under pressure. She told me clearly that what happened was not a family disagreement. It was assault. It was premeditated pressure. And based on the evidence, it could become a criminal case. I felt a tremor of fear move through me, but underneath that tremor was something steadier. Validation. Maya asked for permission to contact the police and become my legal representative. I agreed. The first real battle line had been drawn. As Maya gathered records statements and audio files, my mother launched her own counter-campaign. She called repeatedly, leaving voicemail after voicemail filled with tight, panicked sweetness. She insisted we could fix this privately. She insisted Harper was fragile and overwhelmed. She insisted I owed the family discretion. Her messages grew sharper with each silence. She said I was overreacting. She said the wedding incident was accidental. Then, in a voice dripping with cold fury, she said I was being vindictive and ungrateful. Harper texted me long apologies, each one contradicting the last. In one, she begged for forgiveness. In another, she insisted we both knew I had slipped. In another, she blamed stress. She never admitted what she did. She only tried to rewrite it. Then Clyde reached out, leaving a message filled with thinly veiled threats. He warned that a public dispute would damage my reputation. He warned that Charleston society would take their side. He warned that pursuing legal action would make me an enemy of my own blood. I saved every message. Maya instructed me to document everything, every call, every text, every voicemail. Meanwhile, Charleston gossip swelled like a tide. People speculated about why my wedding had been abruptly canceled. Some claimed I had a breakdown. Others claimed Noah had called it off. A few said I had fainted, and behind the scenes, the Mercer family worked tirelessly to paint the picture they needed. They told people I fell. They told people Noah exaggerated. Some even hinted he pushed me a lie as wild as it was desperate. But every rumor, every whisper, every carefully placed narrative deepened my resolve. Maya moved quickly, filing for a protective order that restricted Harper from contacting me. Harper responded by panicking. She sent me a long email begging me not to ruin her life. She said she did not mean to hurt me. She said she only wanted to talk. She said she tripped and grabbed me accidentally. Nothing sounded accidental. My mother sent a follow-up message trying to negotiate. She offered to pay for the remainder of the wedding. She offered to publicly take blame for family tension. She even offered to restructure the trust. All of it was manipulation. None of it addressed the assault. When we refused to respond, things escalated. Charleston media caught wind of a wedding incident involving a prominent family. Reporters began calling. Maya told me not to answer anything. She told me that silence was powerful when the truth would soon speak for itself. Meanwhile, the police continued their investigation. They interviewed staff from the estate. They retrieved the audio recordings. They examined medical reports confirming that the wound on my ribs aligned with the exact height and structure of the vanity table. They analyzed Harper's text exchanges with the planner, her instructions about locking the suite, and her growing agitation the morning of the ceremony. The timeline formed a clear picture: pressure, confrontation, shove, injury, lies, cover-up. When the lead officer called to inform me that they were moving forward with probable cause for assault charges, I felt a strange mix of dread and relief. The legal war had officially begun. My mother reacted exactly as I expected. She hired a prominent Charleston attorney known for protecting wealthy families from scandals. He contacted Maya, demanding a private resolution, claiming the situation should be handled internally. Maya responded with a clear statement. This is not a family matter. This is assault. The next week, we attended our first official meeting, a pre-negotiation session arranged by the Charleston attorney to discuss potential alternatives to litigation. I agreed only because Maya said hearing their arguments would help our case. The meeting took place in a sleek downtown office where polished wood tables and gold-framed artwork attempted to mask the tension in the room. My mother arrived first, dressed in her composed perfection, but her eyes were darker than usual. Harper followed pale and shaking, unable to meet my gaze. Clyde stood behind them with crossed arms, his expression unreadable but cold. Their attorney began speaking in smooth, practiced tones. He said misunderstandings happen during stressful events. He said emotions can distort memories. He said families should avoid media attention. He also suggested that if we agreed to a private agreement, they would consider covering medical expenses and issuing a statement of regret without admitting fault. Maya leaned forward and asked him a single question. Did Harper shove her sister? The attorney paused. My mother stiffened. Harper's eyes darted to the table. Clyde exhaled sharply. The attorney said there was no evidence of that. Maya opened a folder and slid out printed copies of the email thread I had saved. The one where my mother wrote, "We cannot afford to let her ruin this." The one where Clyde wrote, "Apply pressure." The attorney's face shifted slightly. Maya then presented a transcription of the hallway audio, the section where Harper's raised voice could be heard before the crash. Then former staff testimonies. Then the medical report. Silence spread through the room. It was the kind of silence people create when lies collapse beneath the weight of evidence. My mother broke first, insisting that the emails were out of context. Maya asked her what context justified her daughter bleeding on the floor of a bridal suite. My mother did not answer. Harper finally looked up. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but they were not the tears of someone seeking forgiveness. They were the tears of someone cornered. She whispered that she never meant to hurt me, but her voice trembled with fear, not remorse. Clyde tried to interject, but Maya cut him off calmly, reminding everyone that the police investigation was active. At the end of the meeting, Maya gathered her files, stood, and told their attorney that unless they had an offer that acknowledged guilt and accountability, there was nothing left to discuss. My mother watched me leave without a word. Harper reached out as if to stop me, but her attorney gently pulled her hand down. When Noah and I stepped outside into the cool Charleston air, I felt the shift. The battle lines were no longer invisible. They were drawn bold and irreversible. My family expected me to back down. They expected me to crumble under fear or guilt or pressure. But the truth was stronger than their legacy, stronger than their narrative, stronger than the cage they spent years building around me. As we walked toward the car, I tightened my grip on Noah's hand. The legal fight had only begun, but so had my resolve. I would see this through. I would reclaim my voice. And for the first time in my life, I felt certain that justice was finally within reach. The day of the meeting that would become known, at least in my memory, as the Public Exposure Day arrived with a kind of electric tension humming beneath my skin. Maya called it a joint evidence review session, but I knew what she really meant. This was the day my family would be forced to face the truth they had spent weeks trying to bury beneath lies, connections, and social influence. It was the day their carefully protected reputation would collide with the reality of what they had done. The meeting took place at Maya's office in Raleigh, in a large conference room with glass walls and a long, polished table that reflected the soft afternoon light. The room felt too clean for the kind of truth that would soon be spilled inside it. Noah came with me, his hand steady on my lower back, his presence grounding me like a heartbeat. Maya had arranged everything meticulously, evidence binders organized in chronological order, printed statements, the medical report, the email thread. A digital file loaded onto the screen at the end of the table. She had prepared the room not just for a meeting, but for a reckoning. My family arrived late, a habit they treated like a trademark, as if the world needed to wait for them to enter. My mother led the group dressed in her usual polished elegance. Her chin lifted slightly higher than normal, as if good posture could shield her from accountability. Harper followed behind, pale and jittery, her eyes darting between me and the floor. Clyde walked in last, puffed up with the confidence of a man who believed money could rewrite reality. Their attorney accompanied them, carrying a leather folder and wearing an expression that suggested he expected to control the conversation. He did not yet understand that Maya was not someone who bent to social power. She bent to facts. Once everyone sat, Maya began calmly. She said this meeting would be a structured review. She said the purpose was to allow all parties to view the evidence simultaneously. She said she wanted the Mercer family to see the full scope of what investigators had gathered before the case moved further into the legal system. My mother interrupted her before she could finish. She insisted the incident was a misunderstanding that spiraled out of proportion. She claimed Harper had been under stress. She said I had always been emotional. She said bringing lawyers into it was unnecessary. Maya did not respond to the interruptions. She simply opened the first binder and began. The initial evidence consisted of staff testimonies from the Charleston estate. One by one, Maya read highlights. The hairstylist who heard Harper speak harshly behind closed doors. The security guard who found the locked door and heard shouting through the hallway microphone. The planner who received frantic texts from Harper demanding privacy. The catering staff member who overheard my mother whispering about managing the narrative before the ambulance arrived. With each testimony, my mother's face tightened. Harper fidgeted with her bracelet. Clyde stretched his neck as though uncomfortable being seated for so long. Their attorney scribbled notes but did not interrupt. Maya then laid out the medical report. She passed copies around the table. I watched my mother's eyes flick over the printed words. Deep laceration along the left ribs. Impact consistent with forceful contact against a fixed structure. Injury pattern inconsistent with accidental fall. Maya highlighted the section where the attending physician wrote that the wound location and bruising corresponded with being pushed into the vanity table at a downward angle. Harper's face turned ashen. She squeezed her hands together until her knuckles whitened. My mother glanced at her, a flicker of panic crossing her expression before she smoothed it into neutrality. Clyde shifted again, his facade slipping with each word. Then came the emails. Maya slid them onto the table with a calmness that made the moment even heavier. She asked the Mercers to confirm the messages were authentic. My mother's lips tightened, but she nodded. Maya read aloud. "We cannot afford to let her ruin this. Apply pressure. She will fold." The room went silent. Even the hum of the air conditioner sounded distant. Noah reached for my hand under the table and squeezed gently, grounding me in the moment. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but hesitated. Her attorney placed a hand on her arm, perhaps recognizing the danger of saying anything further. Harper looked sick, staring down at her lap as though wishing she could disappear. Finally, Maya stood and walked to the screen at the end of the table. She pressed a button. The audio file began to play. At first, there was only the faint hum of ambient hallway noise. Then my sister's voice burst through the speakers, raised, sharp, angry. "You are ruining everything." The sound of my voice trembling, barely audible. Harper shouting again. Then the unmistakable crash. The sound of impact. The sound that had ripped through my ribs and nearly ended my life. The Mercer family sat frozen. No interruptions. No excuses. No manipulations. The truth echoed through the room as clearly as if we had all returned to that bridal suite together. When the audio ended, Maya paused the screen and faced them. She asked if they had any explanation for what the recording captured. Silence stretched across the room. My mother's throat moved in a swallow. She closed her eyes briefly, then reopened them with a tight, resigned expression. Harper looked like she might faint. Clyde leaned back, his face red, his chest rising and falling sharply. The attorney cleared his throat and attempted to salvage the situation. He said the audio did not prove intent. He said voices could be misinterpreted. He said the crash could have been caused by many things. Maya remained still. Then she asked if Harper wanted to explain why she had locked the door. Harper's eyes welled with tears. She shook her head. Maya asked if my mother wanted to clarify why she wrote the phrase "apply pressure." My mother inhaled sharply through her nose. She said it was taken out of context, that she meant emotional pressure, nothing physical. Maya let out a quiet breath that sounded almost like a laugh. She asked if emotional pressure justified physical injury. My mother did not answer. Then, in one final calm motion, Maya walked to the door and opened it. 2 police officers stood waiting in the hallway. Harper gasped. My mother stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. Clyde muttered something under his breath. The attorney demanded to know why officers were present. Maya stated plainly that she had notified law enforcement in advance as protocol for cases involving evidence review under active investigation. Then she turned to the officers and said the words I will never forget. "You may proceed." The officers entered the room. One approached Harper, asking her to stand. Her face crumpled as they informed her they had probable cause to detain her for assault while the prosecutor reviewed the case. My mother lunged forward, insisting they had made a mistake, insisting this was family business. The officer stopped her with a calm, firm hand. He said, "Assault is not a family matter. It is a criminal matter." Harper burst into tears as the officers placed handcuffs around her wrists. She whispered my name, pleading, but her voice felt distant to me. Years of manipulation, entitlement, and cruelty condensed into that moment. And finally, the weight fell on the right shoulders. Clyde stood frozen. My mother's face drained of color, her perfect composure cracking like a porcelain mask. She turned to me with an expression I had never seen before. Fear, not for me, for herself. When the officers escorted Harper out of the conference room, her sobs echoing down the hallway, the air felt lighter. Not joyful, not victorious, but lighter. Truth had finally pierced through the performance. Maya closed the door gently behind them and looked at me. Her expression softened. She said this was only the beginning, but it was a strong beginning. Noah wrapped his arm around me. He whispered that I was brave, that I was stronger than I had ever allowed myself to believe. As we walked out of the conference room, past the empty chairs and the silent screen, I felt a steady resolve settle through my chest. The public exposure was complete. They had tried to control me with lies. I had fought back with truth, and the truth had spoken loudly enough to be heard by everyone in that room. In the hours after Harper was escorted out of Maya's office in handcuffs, a strange quiet settled over everything. Not peace, not closure, just a quiet made of shock and exhaustion and the raw ache of truth finally uncloaked. Noah drove us home without saying much, his hand resting on my thigh, the entire ride grounding me whenever my mind drifted back into old patterns of guilt. But something inside me had shifted. For the first time in my life, I did not feel like the powerless daughter living in the shadow of the Mercer family. I felt like someone who had survived the worst of them and refused to be silent anymore. The next morning, the legal dominoes began falling one by one. Maya called at 9:30 with an update. Harper had been booked and processed on a misdemeanor assault charge with bodily injury. The prosecutor was reviewing whether aggravating circumstances applied, given the premeditated pressure documented in the emails and hallway audio. My stomach churned, hearing the words processed and booked associated with my own sister, but the feeling that followed was something far more honest than guilt. It was relief. Harper had spent her whole life protected by our mother's reputation and Clyde's wealth. For once, consequences had bridged the walls they built around her. Soon after, news outlets in Charleston began reporting that a member of the Mercer family was under investigation. Journalists did not yet have details, but they had enough to stir the city. My mother's attempts to silence gossip were no match for the curiosity of people eager to see cracks in the armor of old money. Her friends from the country club, once loyal to the Mercer name, distanced themselves within hours. Charlestown society had a long history of protecting its own, but it also had a longer history of cutting loose anyone whose presence threatened the group's image. My mother learned that truth quickly. Calls she once returned within seconds now went unanswered. Invitations that once filled her calendar suddenly evaporated. Even charitable committees she chaired quietly replaced her name. She was no longer Evelyn Mercer, respected matriarch. She was the mother of a woman charged with assaulting her sister on her wedding day. Clyde was hit next. State investigators opened an inquiry into the trust fund documents after Maya forwarded the emails suggesting manipulation. It began as a simple review, but quickly grew into something larger when inconsistencies appeared in Clyde's financial filings for Mercer Enterprises. Within a week, rumors spread that the board had called an emergency audit. Within 2 weeks, shareholders expressed outrage over questionable fund movements. By the third week, Clyde's position at the company he once commanded like a kingdom began to wobble. He released a statement calling the allegations misunderstandings, but no one believed him. The old guard of Charleston whispered behind closed doors about impropriety and mismanagement. The younger members complained openly that he used company assets to fund private ventures. What began as a private investigation into the trust fund blossomed into a full-scale internal review that stripped Clyde of authority, and the board voted to suspend him pending the audit's outcome. As the walls closed in on Clyde, he lashed out with predictable cruelty. He contacted Noah, threatening him with ruin. He left me voicemails accusing me of destroying the family. He attempted to intimidate Maya, leaving her a message filled with thinly veiled threats about her future in Charleston. Maya forwarded the voicemail to the prosecutor's office. She told me calmly that attempts to intimidate legal counsel were not only foolish but also illegal. And Clyde had made it so easy for them. Meanwhile, Harper faced her own fallout. Her fiancé broke off their engagement after learning of the charges. Her employer asked her to take a leave of absence. Friends she once bragged about vanished. She had always believed she could cry her way into sympathy, but sympathy evaporates quickly when the truth is captured on audio and supported by multiple sources. She attempted to send me a long message from another number filled with frantic apologies and claims that she had not meant to push me as hard as she did. I blocked the number without reading the rest. Forgiveness and accountability were not the same, and she was nowhere near either. My mother's downfall was quieter but more devastating. With Harper arrested and Clyde under investigation, she could no longer pretend everything was under control. She attempted once more to reach me through a handwritten letter delivered to my apartment. The envelope smelled faintly of her expensive perfume, the same scent she wore at galas and luncheons. Inside the letter was filled with twisting, contradictory emotions. She wrote that she loved me, that she was devastated by the situation, that she did not know how things had come to this. Yet between the lines, her manipulation still bled through. She wrote that Harper was fragile. She wrote that families should stick together. She wrote that airing problems publicly was beneath the Mercer name. I placed the letter back in the envelope and slid it into a drawer I did not plan to open again. No matter how carefully she dressed her words, she had chosen her side the moment she whispered to Harper to hide the truth. The protective order hearing came next. The courtroom felt cold, sterile, and indifferent, which somehow made it easier. Harper appeared wearing a simple blouse and minimal makeup, her face still puffy from crying. My mother sat behind her stiff and brittle as though holding herself together with sheer willpower. The judge reviewed the evidence, including the hallway audio and medical report. When Harper attempted to speak, she faltered. Her attorney advised her to stay silent. The judge granted the protective order without hesitation. Harper was forbidden from contacting me in any form. My mother inhaled sharply but said nothing. Outside the courtroom, a few reporters gathered. Maya handled them gracefully. She stated that this was not about family conflicts, but about assault and accountability. She reminded them that victims deserve the right to speak their truth without being silenced by wealth or reputation. Her voice carried through the hallway, steady and unwavering. It was the first time I heard someone speak publicly on my behalf without twisting the narrative. Noah squeezed my hand as reporters turned their cameras toward us. He whispered that justice had only begun, and he was right. Over the following months, the consequences continued to spread. The prosecutor confirmed they would be moving forward with formal charges against Harper. The board of Mercer Enterprises forced Clyde to resign entirely. The press began investigating the family's long history of controlling behavior. Stories surfaced from former employees, whispered accounts of privilege abused, financial irregularities, patterns of manipulation, a legacy of shadows rising into light. The Mercer family's pristine reputation dissolved piece by piece. Through all of this, Noah remained at my side. He attended every meeting, every hearing, every medical follow-up. When I questioned whether I had gone too far, he reminded me that the Mercer family had gone far beyond what any family should. When I doubted my strength, he reminded me how far I had come. Slowly, the trauma began to shift into something else. Not closure. Not yet. But clarity. I no longer jumped at every phone vibration. I no longer replayed the bridal suite in my head with guilt. I no longer wondered whether standing up for myself made me disloyal. I realized I had spent my entire life apologizing for being hurt, for being different, for not fitting into the mold my mother wanted. The aftermath taught me something I had never learned in my childhood. Justice is not loud. It is not glamorous. It does not come wrapped in satisfaction. Justice is quiet. It is deliberate. It is made of depositions and reports and courtrooms and small decisions to choose truth over fear. And sometimes it arrives slowly, like dominoes falling one by one. But those dominoes still fall, and when they do not stop for anyone, not even for a family like mine. 1 year later, I woke to the sound of soft waves brushing the Carolina shoreline, the same rhythm that had once lulled me as a child but now felt entirely different. Back then, Charleston's coast symbolized the world I could never escape. Now it symbolized the life I had rebuilt, piece by piece. I lay there for a moment, listening to the ocean beyond the porch, feeling the quiet peace that had taken months to grow roots inside me. It was the morning of my second wedding. Not the grand spectacle my mother once planned, not the extravagance Harper demanded, not the social event Clyde envisioned. This wedding was mine. A small ceremony on a private stretch of beach near Raleigh with only 20 people, simplicity everywhere and authenticity in every detail. The air smelled of sea salt and early summer warmth. When I stepped outside, the sand was cool under my feet and a soft breeze moved through my hair. Noah was already there, standing barefoot by the shoreline, studying the water with the calm awareness of someone who had walked beside me through the darkest months of my life. When he turned and smiled, the world felt right again. Before the ceremony began, I took a quiet walk alone, needing space to reflect on the year that had reshaped me. The first weeks after Harper's arrest had been heavy and strange. I alternated between relief and sorrow, anger and liberation. Healing had not been a straight line. Maya once told me that trauma behaves like a tide. Sometimes it pulls you under. Sometimes it pulls back and reveals what you were too overwhelmed to see. I had spent months learning how to swim through both. Harper had eventually accepted a plea deal. The evidence was impossible to refute. She pleaded guilty to assault causing bodily injury, received probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. Her record was no longer clean, and she could not hide behind my mother's protection. For the first time in her life, she had to stand on her own feet. I did not attend the sentencing. I did not write a victim impact statement. I did not watch her cry to the judge. That chapter was closed, and I had no desire to reopen it. Clyde's downfall was far more dramatic. The audit uncovered years of financial mismanagement, inappropriate fund transfers, and internal decisions made without board approval. He was forced to resign from Mercer Enterprises permanently. Shareholders threatened legal action. Former colleagues cut ties. Investigators continued to examine certain irregularities, and rumors suggested more charges might emerge. His empire crumbled from the inside, one fraudulent brick at a time. I heard through old acquaintances that he had moved to a smaller property outside Charleston. The man who once boasted about his influence now spent most days trying to salvage whatever remained of his reputation. My mother's collapse came quietly. She lost every committee seat she held. Social circles she once commanded no longer invited her to luncheons or charity events. She attempted to maintain dignity with carefully staged photos and polite public statements, but beneath that thin veneer, her world had fallen apart. 3 months after the incident, she mailed me a long, handwritten letter apologizing again, this time without manipulation and without expectation. She admitted she chose image over children. She wrote that she did not recognize how deeply she had failed me. She wrote that she did not know how to fix what she broke. I folded the letter gently and placed it in a box with the first one. I chose silence. Not out of revenge, out of self-preservation. Some doors cannot be reopened without breaking the room around them. Harper tried contacting me early in the year, but the restraining order prevented her from reaching me. Once it expired, she sent one final message through a mutual acquaintance. It was short. I know I hurt you. I know I cannot undo what I did. I am sorry. I did not respond. We had lived parallel lives, orbiting the same family but never the same reality. I had spent years shrinking myself so she could shine. I had spent years breaking so she could bend the rules. It was not my job to mend her. Some people heal only when the silence around them forces them to listen. What surprised me most in the year that followed was how healing sometimes felt like grief. I grieved the version of myself who spent years begging for scraps of affection. I grieved the childhood I never had. I grieved the family I thought I could save, and slowly the grieving made space for something else. Strength, independence, stillness, joy. Noah and I built a quiet life in Raleigh. I returned to work at the hospital, easing back into long shifts and critical care cases. My colleagues welcomed me with warmth, giving me the space to pace myself. I spent weekends walking through quiet neighborhoods, drinking coffee on our small balcony, and discovering parts of myself that had never been allowed to grow. Trust, confidence, peace. We talked about marriage again, but this time the conversation felt natural, not pressured, not overshadowed by anyone else's expectations. Noah wanted a small ceremony. I wanted something intimate, something real, something ours. And so we planned this day. As the sun lifted higher over the water, guests began to gather. They were not society elites or distant relatives. They were the people who had held my hand through the storm. Co-workers, friends, Maya, a few neighbors, people who saw me as Lydia, not as a Mercer. My heart steadied when I saw Maya walking toward the beach barefoot, carrying a small gift. She hugged me, telling me she was proud of how far I had come. I told her she had saved more than my case. She had saved my voice. When the ceremony began, Noah and I stood facing each other as the ocean shimmered behind us. His vows were simple, steady, and full of the sincerity that had anchored me through chaos. My vows were spoken through tears, not of sadness, but of gratitude, that life had brought me someone who knew how to stay even when everything else fell apart. After the ceremony, guests drifted around a simple wooden arch draped with wildflowers. Laughter filled the soft breeze. Plates clinked lightly. Someone played acoustic guitar. No photographers swarmed. No reporters watched. No one whispered about reputation. This time, love was not a performance. Later, when the sun dipped low and the guests cleared out Noah and I walked along the water alone, the ocean breeze lifted the hem of my dress, and for a moment, everything felt washed clean. I told him I wanted to visit Charleston one last time before closing that chapter forever. Not to see anyone, not to reopen wounds, just to reclaim the parts of the city that had once belonged to me. The next morning, we drove down to the edge of Charleston, stopping at a quiet public overlook where the lighthouse stood silhouetted against the rising sun, the same place my father once brought me when I was a child. Standing there again felt strange, like revisiting a memory that had been locked away too long. I walked toward the railing, the salty wind brushing against my skin, and I let myself breathe. I thought about everything that had happened, the bridal suite, the ICU, the evidence, the courtrooms, the lies that had kept me captive, the truth that had set me free. For years, I believed they controlled my fate. I believed their approval defined me. I believed their love was something I had to earn, but none of that had ever been true. I was not theirs to own. I was not theirs to shape. I was not theirs to break. When Noah wrapped his arms around me from behind, I leaned into him, letting the warmth of his embrace melt the last remnants of fear. I whispered a small truth into the wind, a truth I had never said aloud before. They tried to own my life, but all they did was teach me how to reclaim it. The tide rolled in softly, erasing footprints in the sand, and for the first time in my life, I felt whole, ready for the life I chose, ready for the future I built, ready to rise. If you stayed with me through this entire journey, then maybe you saw a piece of yourself somewhere between the lines, in the quiet moments where I learned to stand alone, or in the painful ones where the people who were supposed to love me the most became the ones who hurt me the deepest. Maybe you have lived through your own version of a closed door where no one believed you, or a family gathering where your voice was drowned out by louder ones, or a lifetime of being told to keep the peace, even when the peace was only protecting the people causing the harm. If so, I want you to hear something clearly. What happened to me was not my fault, and what happened to you was not your fault either. We grow up thinking that loyalty means silence, and that love means endurance, and that family means tolerating the unbearable, but none of that is true. Real loyalty does not demand your suffering. Real love does not ask you to bleed to keep the peace. And real family does not break you and then expect gratitude for handing you the pieces. If you have ever been made to feel small, if someone has ever rewritten your truth, if you have ever been gaslit into believing your pain was an exaggeration, or your memories were flawed, or your worth depended on obedience, then hear me when I say this. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to speak. You are allowed to choose yourself even if the people who raised you do not understand. Healing is not easy. It is not pretty. It does not happen all at once. Some days you will move forward with confidence, and some days you will sit in the remnants of everything you survived, wondering if freedom always feels this lonely at first. But I promise you something from the deepest part of my heart. On the other side of that loneliness is a life that belongs entirely to you. A life where you wake without dread. A life where you do not flinch when your phone rings. A life where love is gentle and kind and patient and never demands you sacrifice your dignity to receive it. If you made it this far, tell me one thing in the comments so I know you are still fighting, still healing, still rising above what was meant to break you. Write the word rising, not for algorithms, not for attention, but for yourself. A quiet declaration that you survived the place that tried to silence you, and you are choosing right now to rewrite your future. I rose. You can rise too. Let the world witness it.